kind of random.
What does joining Hip Hop Now's Patreon mean? It means supporting the kind of hip-hop content that keeps you updated on the latest hip-hop news and moves. It means supporting the production of content like That Time in Hip Hop and Hip Hop Now Reviews. It means you care about the conversation and preservation of hip-hop music and culture. Hip Hop Now Patreon supporters get access to bonus content, merchandise, and more. Support the movement. Become a supporter of Hip Hop Now podcast today at patreon.com/Hip Hop Now.
Let's get right to the business.
Read these headlines. This album must be gone. This album must be gone.
Classic albums are. Classic albums are.
Come to Hip Hop Podcast.
What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast designed to catch you up on all things hip-hop, music, and culture that happen throughout the week. Special shout out to the producers of this podcast who have supported this podcast for some time now over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. If you would like to join them, if you would like to learn more about that opportunity to become a producer of Hip Hop Now podcast, visit that website and check out the information there. And to make it easy for you, the link to that podcast page is in the description of this episode. Click on it. Now, we in 2022, you know, we here. You done made your resolutions, right? About, you know, how much weight you gonna lose, how you ain't taking no stuff, how you ain't carrying no baggage, but you're still the same person. You just get older every year when you don't do that. But it's about progress, right? That's the thing, right? Not to discourage anyone who fit the description right there. We're just saying that, you know, a lot of times we say, but we don't do. And you know me, for those who are familiar with this podcast and those that are new, know that I am dedicated to the future as well as the preservation of hip-hop music and culture, which has been displayed through this podcast, through my other various podcasts that do the same thing. So keeping along with that tradition, I figured, we're coming up on 50 years of hip-hop. I probably have to do something big. Now, for a long time on this show, I've hinted at a book, which I do have, which is written, but I was never comfortable enough to pursue publishing. Not yet, at least. Because you know how you feel like, okay, I wrote it, it's done. But then you kind of want to sit on it for a minute and then go back to it because there's probably more than I could add. I wrote that book a while ago, but you'll hear more about that. But in keeping with what that book was going to represent to hip-hop fans, I have a nice idea. So let's just talk about, first of all, the road to 50 years of hip-hop. Now, back in May of 2021, Mass Appeal announced a thing called Hip Hop 50, an upcoming documentary series on Showtime. Also, back in 2021, I believe, the Universal Hip Hop Museum broke ground and is supposed to open in 2023. Now, why 2023? Well, August 11th, 2023 represents 50 years of hip-hop. It will be the 50th anniversary of hip-hop. That day in particular, in 1973, DJ Kool Herc hosted a back-to-school jam in the Bronx, and the rest is history. Now, I'm getting this from an article that I read called Trapital or Trap Title or something like that, written by a dude by the name of Dan Rusi or whatever. Maybe I'll leave the link in the description so you can check it out since he's giving me the detailed information. But nevertheless, I know the birthday of hip hop, and I know next year, if you're from the future, you already know what to do. Uh, but next year, in 2023, we'll be celebrating 50 years of hip hop. Now, we know hip hop is the number one streaming genre of music of all. Rock, jazz, pop, it doesn't matter. Country, hip hop is number one streaming format or genre of music. So 50 years of hip hop? Oh, we gonna be digging in the crates. Now, Hip Hop Now podcast has already begun the road to 50 years of hip hop. Because what I'm gonna do, instead of waiting to 2023 as a countdown, in 2022, I'm going to do specific episodes that speak to the road to 50 years of hip hop. And I've already done one. Unfortunately, for some, well, let me not say unfortunately, because it's not unfortunate, it's a choice. But that very podcast was my personal review of the documentary of the video series, Video Music Box. Currently, it is exclusive to Patreon supporters because Patreon supporters are the people who bring you this podcast every day, who continue this podcast when it was going to be canceled a year or two ago. They gave me the motivation as well as the monetary thanks in order to improve upon things and do more with this podcast, including video versions and equipment to bring the quality up. So obviously they get first dibs on it, and it's a timed exclusive. So at some point, everyone will be able to hear it. But if you would like to hear it, patreon.com/hiphopnow is right there available for you to hear as a supporter. But nevertheless, that was the first for myself. And it's not just, well, that's a review. What did you really do about it? Well, smart ass. I basically gave my perspective more so on the show Video Music Box while reviewing the documentary about Video Music Box. And what qualifies me as a person to review it and talk about it in such a way, well, I was raised on Video Music Box. I am from Brooklyn, New York, and that is where Video Music Box lived on Channel 31, WNYC. And I was watching it in the 80s and through the 90s. And it's, to me, it's one of those things that I give big props to Nas and Mass Appeal for covering, because it was a New York thing, but I'm glad that people from other regions who don't already know about it get to learn about the impact of Video Music Box and the impact it had on, stations and shows with much bigger budgets like Rap City and Yo MTV Raps. So definitely check that out. But that was my first way of commemorating hip hop, and there'll be more. Now, the big idea on the road to 50, this is not going to be a long episode, by the way. I'm going to just let y'all know that. But the big idea on the road to 50 years of hip hop is that I want to do the top 10. Let me rewind that. Definitively, right? The top 10 definitive. Take that word and put it anywhere in a sentence. Top 10 hip hop albums of all time. Not my top 10 favorite. Not really my personal top 10. This is going to be a top 10 that I'm going to base off of three specific categories that these albums excel at. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because you have to. Because people will look at certain albums that are not in that top 10. And knowing there's only 10 slots, they'll come up with more and more albums that don't equal 10. So having three definitive, I guess, check boxes for you to check for these albums will eliminate other classics from making it in the top 10. Now, obviously, the top 10 will be considered classics to most people. And of course, even with that being said, even with that scoring system, you can say, well, the list is still subjective. And you are right. Because it's literally just a rabbit hole. Because if one of the objectives, which is going to be one, is impact, well, there are a number of albums you can point to that had huge impact. Like 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying. Huge impact. But the other two boxes that it would have to check, does it meet that criteria? I'm not going to give that up now, but that's the point. Does it meet that criteria? Does it check all three boxes? And if it does, then how does it compare to the others in the top 10? Because you could have 20 that check all three boxes. But then you have to start to compare and contrast. Okay, does Get Rich or Die Trying have a bigger impact than Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style? Right? And you got to eliminate one. So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. Now, I did something very similar to this when I called LL Cool J the GOAT, definitively, right? I don't shy away from it because in that episode, which the link will be in the description of this episode, so you can check it out. But in that episode, I purposely do the same thing. I use the same method I just described to you about the albums for why I thought LL Cool J was the hands down GOAT. It's not about just being hot. A lot of people are hot. It's not just about being a legend. You want to tell me LL Cool J is not a legend? It's not about just selling records because he sold records. It's about checking all of those boxes. And in that episode, I felt LL Cool J checked all of those boxes more than other legends in the game. Here's another example. Maybe 2 years ago, pre-pandemic, counting down to 2020, I did the greatest, or the best, put it this way, the best hip-hop album of the last 20 years. Now, that was a little bit different. This was more of a tournament elimination chamber type thing. And it had more or less to do with just being hot, right? Doesn't have to change the game in no way, have some huge impact, change the way people rhyme. It's just about what's the hottest album from year to year, and then pinning them against each other till you had one. And that one was Ghostface Killer's Supreme Clientele. And I even took the finalists and posted a poll on social media just to see what people would say, just to see if my personal bias drove me to that album. Because honestly, if you just asked me without me doing that whole, series of things to come to this conclusion, I probably would have never said Supreme Clientele is the best in 20 years. But for the criteria I laid before it and the albums that we had to compare and how that album compared to other albums, it won. And a couple of people, or most of the people on the polls on social media, backed that up without even knowing that that was the pick. So, top 10 greatest hip-hop albums of all time. Now, I know what you're saying because you say it all the time on social media. Yo, it can't have no skips. It gotta be perfect. That's not true. There are some hands down bona fide, you probably think there's no skips on an album, but there's always one or two songs on a great album that you could skip, but maybe you just let it ride because it's not that bad, or the rest of the album's so hot, who cares, about 3 or 4 minutes, right? We're not doing that. That's elementary. This is 50 years of hip hop. It's time to start looking at hip hop in a different space. We can't just always, I mean, we can, right? But we can't always have the block talk when it comes to hip hop, the barbershop talk when it comes to hip hop. Sometimes we have to put a magnifying glass over hip hop and analyze the impact it has had on pop culture and our society globally, because it has. A couple of years ago, I think, when hip hop turned like 47 or something around that age or whatever, I wrote an article, right? And when I was writing the article to celebrate 40 something years of hip hop, I was like, well, everybody's going to write about, how it started and where it wound up, like the success story and how it's still here. But how many people want to keep reading that? You know what I'm saying? On the day of his birthday. People are not going to click on my review, right? Or my editorial piece about hip hop, or my opinion piece, let's just say that. So I decided to focus on where we are today in hip hop and what we can do better. Now, at that time, and it still somewhat stands, my focus of that article for hip hop was we gotta pay more respect to the legends in the game, because we say it a million times. You look at the Rolling Stones, they have been on stage before all of us was born. Unless you old enough and you listening and you don't know, I was there. I was there when they first did their first show. We're not talking to you, but we definitely talking about, but you know what we mean. But we're talking about generations of people who still support the Rolling Stones to the point where they can sell out stadiums. See, in hip hop, you can rise to selling out stadiums, and then when people feel like you're whack or they don't really like an album or two, now you're doing these group shows at halls, and God forbid, you at a high school or something like that. But that only happens in hip hop. And we're talking about some artists who are like multi-platinum. It's just no way. It's sad. I shouldn't be able to go to a show that has, Wu-Tang, Big Daddy King, Cool G Rap, KRS-One, Jadakiss, The Lox, Mace. Like, it'll have like 1,700 rappers on there, and the majority of them, in most cases have sold a lot of records or are highly respected. Somebody like Rakim, name always gets dropped. Rakim shouldn't be doing no clubs with no shoddy security type situations. Rakim should only be doing, like, he should be like, yo, Rakim is going on tour and we in the Barclay and it's sold out. And some people would say, well, I don't know if everybody from that era is still listening to hip hop going to go to the show. That's the problem. But when you go to the Rolling Stones, the people who were there for them when they first started, people who discovered them in recent years are there, everybody's there. So not to go into a tangent, but when we hit 50 years of hip hop, we might have to revisit that in some way in an episode, at least on the road to 50 years. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and obviously I have my own ideas, but what would you like to hear about as we get on this road to 50 years of hip hop? What kind of topics? Do you want to reminisce? Do you want to talk about a who's better situation? Hit me up on social media. That's either Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, whatever, at Vegas World INC. We could chop it up. I'll be working on shows. Stay tuned for that. Stay tuned, obviously, for news in the hip-hop world, because there's a lot. And check out the last episode where I gave my predictions for the year 2022 and what albums and artists will return. That's going to do it for me. You can check out this podcast wherever you get podcasts. All you have to do is go to your favorite podcasting app, hit the search icon, type in the words Hip Hop Now Podcast, hit the subscribe button, rate it, review it, like it, but more importantly, share it with people you know enjoy this kind of content. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic, I'm a fan. Peace.
Drop it on the random.